go. Oh, it's that time again. Oh, it's just what you've been waiting for, dears. Another episode of the Shy Life podcast coming right up. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, sit back and relax.
I must protect Shy Yeti.
How are you? Hope you're fine. This is the Shy Yeti Show.
Okay, where you go?
Why have I got horns? Oh no.
Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Boy, he's not all that shy, is right. She.
Blimey, Governor, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Hello, Paul.
Oh. Quack, quack, quack.
I do know how he does it.
Excellent.
700. The chance was set. The chance was set. 700.
Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shy Life podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How you doing? I'm all right. So what's this episode going to be about? Well, we've got some special guests this time. This is an episode for the aficionado of cult TV. I think we're going to be mainly talking, at least from this end, we're going to be talking about sort of sci-fi-ish type programs or that sort of genre. But I don't know what my other guest is bringing. So until we start talking, we won't know. I probably introduce the guest rather than being also.
You mean we haven't planned this all out? And we don't have a script?
No, what's going on here?
I've got Nick here, who's in the room with me. And I've got Toppy Smelly, who's not in the room with us, except for in voice, floating around the room.
Far, far away.
Yeah. So basically, Nick and I are going to tell Toppy about some more obscure UK shows, and Toppy's going to do the same with shows that are... it'll be interesting if any of the shows we mention, either from either side, like if one of us goes, oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how obscure we are or how much we know. So anyway, let's run the theme music, and when we come back, we'll get talking. And it's going to be an episode worth listening to, listeners, because you might learn something, and you might learn something about a show you've never heard of, and you might even be able to track it down. Who knows? Okay, run that theme music.
Darling, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Keep it rolling, keep it rolling.
Yeah, but it's a positive thing for the high life, the shy life.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, campers. How are you?
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, I hope he hasn't found out my secret. I think he has.
I love the Yeti'S. It's my favorite thing.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Yeah, I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all gooey and meaty. Yum, 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 yum.
I don't think I'm ready to speak about it.
Here comes the grizzly.
Hi there.
It's the Shy Life podcast.
I can't wait for it to begin.
I like that. Yeah.
Marvelous, Paul. Oh dear, I can't believe that old bag is still around.
So, full disclosure to the listeners. I just a day or so ago, I knew I was coming down to Salisbury to see my parents and see Nick, and Nick and I always do some recording, whether it be a diary episode where we look at our old diaries, or whether it's a random word episode.
But I thought you guys were going to get together and have Salisbury steaks.
Well, actually,
I can't have steaks. Not my teeth the way they are these days.
No, I might be having a steak when we go for my birthday meal, but that's That may have long since happened by the time we edit this episode.
Oh. Well, after we record, Nick and I, you and I will have to talk, and because I have the same problem. I have the same problem. Anyways,
I mean, they're not in any. It's just a steak would be too much hard work for them. I think these days.
That's right.
Get somebody to do it for you. I'll eat your lunch for you.
It's too much at stake.
Well, I think. Oh dear! Did he just say that? Oh dear.
So yes, back to the story. Not very interesting story, but we'll just finish it as we started it. I thought we haven't done an episode with Nick and Toppy for a while, and it would be a nice chance. But is Toppy going to be free? And I said to Toppy, any chance you're free to do some recording with Nick? And Toppy goes, I'm free. So so I thought, okay, now what are we going to talk about, which we haven't talked about before? And I thought, well, we have talked a lot about TV, but generally we've talked about quite well-known TV shows. So there must be room to, and I was thinking, even stuff like Blake Seven or Sapphire and Steel, they're not top league famous shows, but I'm sure we have talked to Toppy about those before. So we really need to go obscure, more obscure than usual, and also maybe the listeners, because we have an international brand these days, you don't know who knows about what. So let's educate, at least, you listeners, you're listening in, but let's try and, we want to be educated by Toppy, and we thought that Toppy would be interested in hearing about some of our more obscure shows. A lot of these shows are shows that Nick knows a lot about, more than I do. So although I will be commenting in, Nick's going to take the lead on a number of them because he knows so much more about them. So, Nick, yes. Where do you want to start? We've got a little list here.
I think where I'd like to start, I think, is because I think probably in terms of obscure shows, the earliest one I can think of, one of the earliest ones, and one that meant a lot to me, is The Changes. Now, this was in the late 60s. An author called Peter Dickinson wrote a triage of children's stories, which basically have a bit post-apocalyptic, only without an apocalypse. A spell comes over the world, and everybody turns against technology or modern advances. Basically,
so this is a story about modern times.
That's right. Yeah, kind of a post. A sort of like very, very post. Everyone goes very pre-industrial, and they turn against it. In an almost religious fever, and this certainly each book concentrated on one. Some protagonists, and you saw the time through with them. Now, shortly after that, in the 70s, Anna Holmes, who was a very famous children's producer, wanted to make it into. It was like a
trilogy.
Trilogy, that's right. Yeah, so called The Changes, and she wanted to make it into a one big long serial. And then there was various rights and things like that. But eventually, in 1975, it got put on, and there was a warning. This would have gone out about 4:45 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was a warning saying, there's this is a new children's series. There's going to be a few disturbing scenes at the beginning. And sure enough, they had this, they had the scenes of violence, which I now know was shot in Bristol, which I've seen many scenes of violence over the years. With all the people turning against it, smashing tellies, and throw in a bit of stock footage with burning trains and things like that. And it was a kind of very much what would happen if civilization finished tomorrow, and they took one of the girls from the book, Nikki Gore, and they had her go through all these adventures. So you had one straight through line, not just chopping and changing characters. You had some continuity, which I thought was a very clever idea. And I was riveted. It was something I remember first time round, and the repeat showing second time round in 76. And as you know, one of my great weaknesses is heroines, vulnerable heroines, and I just every week, yes, I will admit I did have a little crush on her. I was 6, you know, I was pretty tarty 6, but I was 6, and I wanted to go into this world where she was moving from one danger to another, and I wanted to be alongside her, and it drew me in. The whole thing drew me in, and you had Sikh characters. They were coming on. You've got to know their culture. You had robber barons. You had there was a guy who sort of got very Matthew Hopkirky, and and sort of wanted to sort of execute her as a witch, and that bit particularly drew me in this village that has kind of turned hostile to her, and she meets an ally, and they go, and it's all at the end. I won't say too much, but it's linked with Arthurian legend. But it was thoroughly involving, all on film, very wasn't played for kids. You know, it was very much not children, sort of teenage protagonists actually just getting involved in it, and I just loved it. And I waited for years for them. There was a rumor that not all of it existed, and I waited for years and years. And BFI, bless them, finally put it out in 2015. The picture of myself, a picture of that and a bottle of champagne, and I was absolutely delighted. But it has that kind of magic for me. No aliens or anything, but it was just draws me, and even now, I thoroughly enjoy it.
Toppy, before you tell us about whatever shows you're going to tell us about, I did want to ask, because Nick and I were talking about this. There was definitely a very strong tradition in the UK of shows for children showed in the afternoon, sort of so that they could be watched when kids returned from school. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good, but a lot of them in the 70s and 80s were pretty good quality. But what I don't know is how much TV there was in the States for a young audience, or was it just cartoons and the odd thing? I mean,
particularly at a certain hour.
Yeah, I remember a show called The Red Hand Gang, which was a sort of kids detective-y thing.
I remember that,
but that didn't last. But at the time, it felt like it was. I think they must have repeated it a few times. I think there's only 12 episodes or something, maybe even less. But it seemed to go on for a lot longer. And things like The Littlest Hobo, which was about the dog getting into adventures. Other than that, we did get some. You remembered one or two others, but
I think it's more that most of the cartoons from the States.
Yeah,
we got.
But what do you remember when you were young? The stuff that was definitely made for kids.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of that kind of stuff, but very little original material made for after school watching, because certainly that's what most kids did. They went home and they watched TV.
Yeah.
But what you saw, if it was kid related, they were reruns of primetime television shows. There was very, very little original programming for afternoon TV, because of course, as you know, TV programming is just very different here in the States and where you are, and very little was originally made. Every once in a while, particularly towards the latter part of the 70s, when there were more syndicated shows, you might run across something that was, let's make this half-hour thing. It's some sort of sci-fi thing or whatever. It's for kids. But what we saw were television stations that would put on old monster movies, or they'd put on old TV shows. And that's what we got. We got reruns.
And at the time of it being the screen, Dark Shadows sort of, I mean, at least I've read about how kids would rush home from school to see Dark Shadows. So that was obviously sort of the soaps, the afternoon soaps was probably sort of taking the slot that perhaps the kids' shows over here took.
I think in that particular case, Dark Shadows, while it was never originally intended to interest children, well, it turned out a huge chunk of their audience was children, and that's a very unusual example. But yeah, that of course was original material that was deliberately put on after school.
Because the nearest thing I can think to that was the soap Neighbours that that Kylie Minogue and people like that started on. That was originally shown at lunchtime, and then I think in the school holidays, kids started watching it, and then it got back to the TV company that actually the kids would still like to watch it. Now they were back at school, so could there be a repeat around tea time? So that's why Neighbours became, and then I think it became a bit of a tradition with another soap called Home and Away that started a year or so later, or 2 or 3 years later, that it was also shown at lunchtime, but then at tea time, because they realised that teenagers liked soaps that perhaps they'd never really thought about that in the past. They'd always put soaps on in the evening.
I think also, just as a postscript to the changes, the lead actress in it, Vicky Williams, now Victoria Williams, who's occasional on and off actress, is one of those people that I'd love to meet one day and say, actually, you were my hero. You know, I wanted to jump in and protect you and kind of. And the other thing was very similar, because there was a very serious kind of, in a way that they could be done for the adult market if they didn't have kind of youth protagonists in them, but a sort of very good quality drama for kids. And there's one that I remember that I haven't seen since the early 70s, and that's The Long Chase. And I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, and somebody said, they put it on YouTube. So they're actually, so particularly when my wife's working or whatever, I've started sticking on The Long Chase, and it's really good. It's got some very kind of adult actors, ones that you'd see in everyday drama during that time, and it's very nicely made and everything. But there's an awful lot of good stuff that's not out there yet on media.
Unfortunately, some of the people that used to put it out, the companies have suffered financial problems, and
that's very true.
And what makes you worried whether you will, because they would have been the sort of companies that would have.
Although Network did mainly ITV, it did do a few Beebs, but not very many. But BFI probably, which is the main sort of film, looks after films internationally, is probably the best bet for something like that.
There are quite a lot of shows that were made for kids. I mean, Doctor Who is a case, not really the sort of area we're talking about today, but Doctor Who's the sort of case that people who are trying to be patronised, Doctor Who, kind of say, oh, it was a kids' programme, where it was never intended as a kids' programme. It was intended as a family programme, and it was never made from the children's TV budget. It was made from the drama budget. So, yes, it might have attracted kids, but it also attracted adults. So it was never intended to be just one viewership. But there's a show I like called Ace of Wands, which is relatively obscure, which is about a magician who gets into lots of adventures and things. And really, there's not a child cast member at all. It was quite good in the 70s. They didn't feel they had to put children in children's TV. I mean, there were younger characters, like in their 20s. But the last thing I would have wanted to have watched when I was a kid was more blooming kids. I hated them. I would have been much more keen to see a drama with an adult main character and maybe like with Doctor Who,
particularly brainy kids, particularly sort of young geniuses. You kind of.
I bet. We were saying about this earlier before we started recording, that after about the age of 10 or 11, I was keen to jump into adult stuff, because my parents used to let me watch like detective programs, not the sort of really hardcore ones, but things like Agatha Christie or Miss Marple and things like that. And so I was jumping into reading adult books at the age of 10, 11, 12, and didn't really want to go back to reading kids things or watching kids things, really. And I know there's a whole genre of sort of books for teenagers, which I completely missed. I mean, I probably read more books for teenagers as an adult than I ever did as a teenager, because I discovered that there were novels of things like I Know What You Did Last Summer, which and there was a particular author who wrote that and a number of other sort of psychological thrillers, but they were made for teenagers, and it wouldn't necessarily even occur to me that would have been the case, considering that I Know What You Did Last Summer, the film's not necessarily made for teenagers. It's made for just people who like horror films. But I mean, it's nothing like the film's nothing like the book either. But anyway, Toppy, what would you like to tell us about a show that you've come across that you think we'd be interested to hear about?
Well, yeah, I got one for you. Now, of course, both of you know all about the Land of the Giants.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alan, well, did you know, because I didn't until a year or so ago, that there was a series that predates Land of the Giants by a good 10 years or so. It came out on American TV, and it was called not Land of the Giants, it was called World of Giants.
Oh, right.
No, never heard of that, I don't think.
Yeah, it was a short-lived science fiction series. It ran 30 minutes, and it was about a secret agent who was about 6 inches tall.
Inside Private Eye.
And he's carried around from one mission to another in a briefcase with a small chair inside.
Man in a suitcase.
Yeah, the suitcase is just innocently left somewhere, and he comes out, and he can, thereby infiltrate all of these places where an average man might not be able to do. And that was the show. And they had giant props and really quite inventive special effects. And that he was a little teeny tiny secret agent.
Which, funny enough, they did in cartoon form with Inside Private Eye.
That's right.
And also, basically, I've never seen an episode of Man in the Suitcase, but I did, until I read an article about it, I assumed it was somebody who, the secret agent, as you say, could shrink himself down to
Wait a minute. So you know something that was called Man in a Suitcase?
Yeah, there was a sort of spy thriller show, but I think.
But are we talking about the same show? Do you think?
No.
This is the 60s. This was
the late
sort of
60s.
Late 60s.
Okay. But that was the same thing? Some little guy in a suitcase?
No,
that's what I assumed it was.
No.
But apparently, I think it was a secret agent who goes from place to place.
He's always living out of a suitcase.
It was an American actor, wasn't it? I forget
okay. Gotcha.
But it was one of the ITC series, the film series for international market. And I think it's because he lived out of the suitcase. That was the thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was called Man in a Suitcase. So I assumed before I read about it.
I have the box set. I've watched one episode, but it was a bit slow. So I had to have a second run up sometime.
Yeah. Well, this was definitely made for adults, and thank goodness for YouTube, because if you ever want to catch clips from it, and they've even got a couple of full episodes, it's on YouTube, World of Giants.
That's because the props on Land of the Giants were always exceptional. They always looked so good, because cameras were very close up on them, so you couldn't really get away with them being bad. I mean, sometimes if the fingers came down, you could tell they weren't real. they were, but the actual prop things like a giant safety pin or a hook or a paper clip or a box, or they Must have really kept the people behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting challenge must have been for World of Giants and Land of the Giants is, well, how do you show that they are little people? Because proportionately, they're just human beings. Well, put them by a giant pencil.
Well, Doctor Who did in 1964. Doctor Who did a giant episode where the crew was shrunk to the size of an inch, I think, and they in that case, of course, the technology wasn't there, so they did the big. It was big props all the way. Whereas when they did an episode where they're shrunk in the 70s, it was all color separation overlay, green screen sort of.
Yeah. And by the way, folks, if you ever want to see maybe the best little miniature guy movie, is The Incredible Shrinking Man. Is a phenomenal movie. Phenomenal movie.
Yeah, I remember. I think I've seen clips of it, but my mum saw it one night in the 70s or 80s and told me all about it.
Yeah, good movie. So yeah, who knew about World of Giants?
Can I just ask Toppy, are we talking sort of like the 50s?
Well, this was 59. That show came out.
Yeah, so yeah, predating Land by nearly 10 years. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I was just saying, did you want to talk about the Survivors next? Is there a little bit? It's a little bit like the Changes.
Yes, Survivors was a similar idea, but proposed by Terry Nation, who created the Daleks, and it was with that. It was a slightly more brutal and less fanciful version of the Changes, even though it was as a series. It was done. The Changes was just a series, but literally just. I think a month or so after the Changes went out in '75, we saw the Survivors. Now, like Changes, I have memories of the Survivors, but it was very much an adult show. It went out about 8:10 at night or something, and it was about you never actually explicitly saw this happen, but. Apart from the title sequence, but a rogue virus got out of a lab. It's implied it's sort of one of the eastern countries, and it basically spreads basically appears as a flu, a very nasty form of flu, and wipes out 95% of the world's population. And so we see this very very well-to-do family, and there's the boy in boarding school and the privileged wife, and slowly but surely, the society breaks down, and they go mostly around the country because the cities have got too many dead bodies and virulent plagues and things like that, and it just the attempt to survive. Some people, I think, find it a bit slow, particularly the second series, but I at its best, I think it's very electric. But there was the music got me, because the title sequence was the beginning of the plague itself, with them accidentally dropping a flask of the virus, and it went out when I was 6, and I suppose I shouldn't have been up at that time, but you would catch the odd glimpse of it, and then the titles really freaked me out. Particularly, it starts with this Oriental scientist with very 70s horn rim specs underneath this protective sheet, so it is sort of chemical lab in a chemical lab, and of course my mum in those days had horn rim specs, and it was like seeing my mum with polythene over her, which was terrifying, and the music was quite scary too. So most times I wouldn't get past the title sequence, but I remember one episode in the first series, and when we were on holiday that year, my sister and I because we used to share a room, and we were trying to sing the music. We were trying to remember the music. So but I didn't go beyond that much, because the titles I found rather disturbing. But it was a very strong show.
Three seasons of 13 episodes.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know what triggered this, but I don't know if it was because of The Walking Dead, but about 10 years ago, a bit more than that, they did a reboot.
They did,
and I enjoyed it. And unfortunately, it lasted 2 series, and they ended it. They left it on a cliffhanger, which they never resolved. Which I always think, if you do that, you should be committed to doing one more episode.
Exactly. That was about 2008. I found an old tape that you had of it. Ali and I gave it a shot. Obviously, by that point, I think we had all of the survivors on DVD, the original, and I thought it was fairly interesting, but it didn't catch on with both of us, really. The incentive wasn't enough, really. But the characters were the same. It really was a reboot, but done slightly differently.
They did the same trick in the first episode as they'd done in the first episode of the original, where they cast quite a lot of famous people in it. And so that would make you think, well, they can't be killing off that character because it's played by X actor. And
in particular, Doctor Who was somebody who had been a Doctor Who girl,
yes.
Not a year earlier.
That was in the remake.
Got killed off in the first episode.
Yeah, but they did the same trick in the first, like with having Peter Bowles.
Yes,
in it, and a few other.
They did actually. Yes.
Yeah. So, but it works quite well, because you think, oh well, they're not going to be killing off that character because it's played by a famous actor. But then they did.
It was a good. Yeah, it was a good show. I like. Still like watching the episodes. My niece's ex-husband, who was a New York lawyer for a while, he like me is a great fan of old TV, and he actually bought my sister the box set of the original Survivors, and of course she's very modern TV's better, not really into DVDs anymore, and when I last stayed with my sister, I saw this and I thought she'd had an epiphany. I kind of, she saw that and really liked it. But no, Tyler gave it to her, and I don't think she's ever watched it. But it's more for her.
Also, in a similar genre, from a few years later, when I was a bit too young for the Survivors first time round, but. There was an adaptation of the John Wyndham book Day of the Triffids, which is again about if you took the Triffids out, or like in The Walking Dead, if you took the zombies out, you've got the survivors basically, where people are having to sort of struggle to survive.
It'd be Day of the Blind People, really, wouldn't it? Without Triffids.
But so I was sort of familiar with that. Set up from Day of the Triffids, which scared me to death. They did a BBC adaptation in about 1981. And
very atmospheric,
yeah,
very well made.
And I watched one episode and was so scared that my parents refused to let me watch it anymore. And they repeated it in 1983, and my mum was like, "You were scared when you saw it." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm 2 years older now. Let me watch it."
Well, I was the opposite. I would watch stuff and be scared of it, and my mum would have let me do it. Watch it. I was my own censor, as it were. I can't remember a single time when she said, "Don't watch this; it's too scary." She'd always make me let up my own mind, and then the nightmares would come, and But my sister tells a very different story. I mean, she's 8 years older than me. So when she was growing up in the 60s, they were a bit stricter with her.
Yeah, probably the first child syndrome, I had.
She wasn't allowed to watch with the first Doctor. She would have remembered the first Doctor, and she wasn't allowed to watch him because it was too scary.
Because my brother definitely got away with watching a lot more scary things, and also by the time, and because we are 8.5 years, by the time he was 10, I was 18 and buying horror films. So pretty sure he snuck my horror films out of my collection and watched them when my parents were around. My only access to horror films as a kid was when I got a video of my own. I was able to record sort of Hammer films and stuff off late night TV, but anyway, that's sort of going a little bit mainstream now. So, Toppy, what else do you have to tell us about?
Well, really, really fascinating short-lived show. Came out around 1970. It had a pilot movie, ABC Movie of the Week, and then I guess it did well enough in the ratings. They said, sure, go for the series. And it's called The Immortal. Oh. And it had a really unusual look and feel, and the soundtrack, the music was interesting. And it was about this guy. I don't remember how he got this special property, but his blood was special somehow. And the guy's immortal. And he finds out, people find out about it, and they want his blood. They want the properties of his blood. So it's another TV show that had this wandering, running person. Like every episode, he's in a different place. He meets new people, like The Fugitive or many, The Incredible Hulk. Invaders. Many shows had that, Invaders. So this guy was always running from the people that basically wanted to dissect him. And and the funny thing is, if he gave his blood to other people, he could save their lives and stuff. I don't think they would become immortal, but he could bring people from the brink of death. It lasted only about 15 episodes plus the pilot movie, and was unceremoniously canceled. Again, here, Paul, we have a cliffhanger where they never resolved. It was never resolved. But I ran across it, I think, because it must have been rerun at some point at a time when I could see it, because at that time, 1970, I wasn't staying up late. So I must have seen that. And then even later, back when the Science Fiction Channel or the Sci-Fi Channel, to me, when that network, that cable show was great, was when it first came out, because they didn't have any original programming. So what did they do? They went and found every damn weirdo TV show that ever was, and they filled the day with all these old television series that had a sci-fi bent. And so for a while, the Sci-Fi Channel played The Immortal.
It's ironic for a show about someone who's immortal that it was so short-lived.
Seriously, somebody better study.
No, that sounds interesting.
To a certain extent, that's what happened when they started with Channel 4 in the early 80s in the UK. That's how I got to see the Avengers and a lot of the 60s shows.
That was my first taste of the. So I grew up with the new Avengers, but I'd never seen an episode of the Avengers until Channel 4. Well, we got Channel 4 about a year late. So from sort of 83 onwards, we were Paul and I, even though we'd still 5 years away from meeting, we were both experiencing the Avengers for the first time.
Let me just say, the Immortal, the guy, he was played like Christopher George. There was another actress, Jessica Walter was in it.
Played Misty for me, or is that just
right. Yeah. And Ralph Bellamy was in it.
Oh yeah,
I think he was this old man who feared death. He was the guy chasing. He wanted the Immortal's blood because he was old and he was dying, and he was a millionaire, and so he was constantly looking for the Immortal because he wanted his blood.
Christopher George, who is married to Linda Day George, who is in Mission Impossible, and I feel like that might be the case because they appeared in lots of sort of Italian horror films together in later in the decade and into the 80s, because I think he died quite young. I guess the person I'm thinking of anyway. Or he died in middle age anyway. So he wasn't immortal either. But, I think I might tell you about a show that I particularly liked, and although it started in about 1976, it ran into 1984, so I was a bit young at the start of it, but it was definitely a staple of my childhood. It's a show that definitely was made for kids, although more recently there's been a few rumours that famous Hollywood movie stars wanted to turn it into big movie versions. A, how much that was just an old wives' tale, and B, how they'd even have discovered the show to start with, unless it did get repeated in Canada or I don't know. Sometimes British shows do escape over here, but anyway, the show is Rent a Ghost. It's a comedy show shown on for kids, and it ran for 8 seasons, I think. That's right.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a misnomer that it was more serious at the start, but I recently saw some early episodes, and it's just completely ridiculous and silly. Imagine the silliest episode of the Charlotte podcast, and it's about 10 times sillier than that.
That's pretty silly.
It's pretty silly, yeah. Basically, it's 3 ghosts who run a sort of an agency. It's sort of. Do they investigate? I'm never sure, because they are definitely different times.
They're asked to do jobs.
They're asked to do jobs. Yeah. One of the ghosts in the early season, his parents don't know he's died, so he has to. He sort of has to maintain that everything's fine. But one of them is a court jester, and the other one is a John Pertwee impressionist.
Well, yeah, he's certainly very. I don't know. He's even more dandy than Pertwee. I mean, he with his tallness and his grey hair and his fancy clothes. But I think he's supposed to be a Victorian gentleman.
Yeah, as it goes on, you get characters like Muck Witch, who is a Scottish witch, and you get a Miss Popoff. I'm not sure what her job is. But she's allergic to flowers. They can teleport, so they have lots of running gags where, like, her character, if she gets near a flower, she teleports at the most inappropriate moments. You have neighbours there's a character called Harold Meeker who sort of is the boss of the ghosts at Rent a Ghost, and he has this wife called Ethel, who is very dizzy, and she reminds me a bit of Lucille Ball in a strange way. Lucille Ball, but with about.
I love Ethel. It wouldn't really make.
Lucille Ball, but without 25% of the talent. But she one of her things is that she sings so badly that the glass cracks in the hair. There's just lots of really nonsense stories. One of the characters that comes into it is a pantomime horse, which, I mean, I know pantomimes aren't that well known about anyway, but in pantomimes you often have a pantomime horse or a pantomime cow, which is basically 2 men in a cow costume. But yeah, one of the characters is a pantomime horse, and I still remember. I mean, I watched an episode of Rent a Ghost a few years ago, and it was funnier than any comedy show that you would find on TV now, and ridiculous and surreal. That there was an episode where they went down to the sea, and there was the pantomime horse and a big. It's almost cartoon-like. The horse is there with a straw hat and big sunglasses on the beach, and it's just very, very slapstick. There's a lot of sort of very silly situations, like devices that might put curses on people, or spells get put on people for them to, I don't know, speak their. One character might go, "I wish people would be honest with me," and then suddenly wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Suddenly there's a spell, and everyone is speaking, sort of speaking their mind, but it's not necessarily very pleasant. There's all sorts of ridiculous scenarios. There was even a dragon who was also played by a man in a suit, a dragon who lived down in the cellar, and every episode ended with some characters ending up running away from some other characters and ending up going down in the cellar, and all the cast going, "Don't go into the cellar," and then they'd come back up the stairs, and they'd all, whilst the titles were running, and they'd all be charred with all their clothes sort of half burnt off, and it was just very, 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 very slapstick, very, very silly. But a lot of people are very fond of it. But yeah, there was a bit of a misnomer that it was more serious in the past, in the very early seasons. But from the episode I saw the other day, it was always silly, pretty much from episode 1. So it's a shame. They released the first season on DVD and then, for whatever reason, didn't release anymore. And you can still find plenty of episodes on YouTube, and had a very catchy theme tune that a lot of people will remember.
Sung by Michael Staniforth, who actually played the Jester.
Yes, yeah. But it was a sort of 25-minute program. If you think of some of the sillier episodes of Bewitched, then you might be getting halfway there to an episode of Rent-A-Ghost. But,
again, none of the shows you guys have talked about today, I don't think ever arrived here. These are completely unfamiliar.
No, I mean, some of them I can understand. With Rent-A-Ghost, I can probably understand. It's probably a bit too English and pantomime and slapstick and things like The Survivors. Maybe, I don't know. As that was a BBC show, who knows if it ever ended up on a...
Also, I think if it was, say, like with the changes, the kids' shows, I don't think they really kind of thought seriously about marketing it to America. They didn't. Yeah. They didn't have that leg of the commercial leg of the BBC quite in gear by then, I think.
They didn't even see the benefit in keeping a lot of Doctor Who to start with.
Yeah.
They couldn't, even like 10 years down the line, when you started to get fan clubs and things, they were still wiping them. It didn't seem to have anybody with a vision of, actually one day, not that long, another 10 years down the line, and people will start having like videos in their own homes. And it's few had the vision. I've always wanted to know why Dan Curtis, who created Dark Shadows, kept every damn show. Why did he do it? How could he have known? But he did, and that's why every episode except one of them can be seen. But how did he know? I'd love to know how he knew.
I wish someone had done that with Who in terms of
It's a good length. The Dark Shadows is a good length of show, in the same way as one of my favourites, Business of Block H and Sons and Daughters. They're sort of Aussie soaps that lasted for like 7 or 8 years, so maybe less than 1,000 episodes, which is still a lot because they're Business of Block H is 50-minute episodes, but enough that you can release it as a box set, and they did. But it's when you get a show that goes on for 30 years, or like Coronation Street, they end up just releasing best of box sets. It's hard to sort of consider releasing everything. Well, they don't necessarily have everything of some of those sorts of genre TV programs anyway. But Dark Shadows is a good length of duration for it to be released. Why he kept it, other than maybe, I don't know.
I don't know.
Was he a big thing behind? I didn't realise how much of a thing it was his sort of choice, or whether it was the TV companies, or whether it was both. Or
good question. It's just that it was a soap, and there were tons of soaps, but never saved any of them. I know Dark Shadows is a bit of an exception because it was so wildly popular for a few years, and I do mean just a few years. But it was unheard of. Keep the tapes?
Yeah, almost more strangely, there's that Canadian show Strange Paradise, which only lasted about a year, which was the Canadian sort of version or inspired by Dark Shadows, and the fact that all of that exists for a show that didn't really ever have any big success. For that still to exist is quite something. Whether Canada has different rules again on what they keep and didn't keep. But what about you, Toppy? What would you like to tell us about next?
Well, this one you might have heard of because, oddly enough, although it was created for American television, we never got to see all the episodes because it was a bomb. But oddly enough, the show did get aired in Britain, and you guys saw all the episodes. So, this is it's interesting because there were a lot of television shows that used invisibility as the gimmick, going way back to a British TV show called Just the Invisible Man, and he was solving crimes. An old black and white TV show. You guys remember that one?
I do remember a sort of 50s version.
I remember the 70s version with David McCallum.
Right, and then we
used to get that on the American one. We used to get that on a Friday night. It's in 75.
Yeah, that I was going to mention that next.
Sorry.
That came along, and the show I'm going to talk about came 1 year later after the David McCallum series. By the way, David McCallum, rest in peace.
Yes,
I really liked him as an actor.
Yeah.
Anyways, that David McCallum's Invisible Man wasn't exactly a hit. So why 1 year later another network decided, let's go with a show about an invisible man? I'm not sure. This series was called The Gemini Man.
We got that as well.
Yeah, now you guys saw all the episodes.
I remember watching it because Ben Murphy, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Jones.
Yeah.
And I remember he had a watch that made him invisible.
Yeah, yeah. And also his gimmick was that he could only be invisible for 15 minutes. And if he was invisible longer, he would remain invisible forever.
I remember thinking, like yourself, I'm thinking, oh, right, they haven't brought back the Invisible Man, but they've brought back a variation of the Invisible Man.
So this guy could vanish with his clothes and all on, because one of the stupid things about David McCallum's show that you couldn't help think about is that he had to strip naked to be invisible. And he's running around everywhere naked.
Yes. And if his invisibility did sort of expire, if for example, obviously he was permanently invisible, but, if it had sort of kind of expired, you'd be in the middle of being tied up or something. He'd be
yes. Anyway, so
I am fond of the Invisible Man, though.
Yeah. I think I saw Gemini Man, but it's very vague memory. We only got 5 episodes, and then it was disposed of and forgotten. And of course, there were 6 more episodes that you guys saw, but we never did.
We got it in the year after Invisible Man in 76, as you say. But I loved David McCallum's Invisible Man. Because you would always, it was a nice thing to look forward to on a Friday night after school. But also because of the time it went out, at the end of it, you got the sort of Saturday night lineup for the next day, and you inevitably got a trailer for tomorrow's episode of Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I love the gimmicks of it, in it, and actually we were watching an episode the other day.
Yeah, we watched one when he died, after he died.
After he died, that's right. Yes, when you were last year, and it was I liked it so much that because it was the autumn and my birthday's at the end of October. My sister did me a homemade card with just the clothes and said "Happy Birthday from the Invisible Man." Which I thought would tickled me. I wish I'd still had it.
Yeah, I've heard of Gemini Man, but I don't think I've ever seen an episode of that. I would have been quite small at the time.
But yeah, I'm definitely. I don't think it was quite as taken with it as Invisible Man, but I did watch it.
I didn't know this, but I'm looking at notes about Gemini Man. Harvey Bennett was the producer, and of course he went on to be associated with Star Trek.
I think he did produce the Invisible Man as well.
Oh.
So it was a bit weird that sort of they kind of it really was just a reformat, wasn't it? Kind of like, oh, right there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, well, I'll be damned. You know what? The David McCallum's show was created and produced by Harvey Bennett, and the reason this came out a year later was because Harvey Bennett apparently just loved the idea of an invisible man, and he repackaged the whole thing to make a show that had simpler and less expensive special effects, because David McCallum's show had some very expensive special effects.
Yes,
especially when he's putting on the makeup.
Every time he took his head off, it was all kind of...
So, very interesting. He repackaged it. He and made it Chimney Man, and he didn't have to have all the expense of the special effects. So
It's interesting.
how about that?
They didn't go with McCullum. They could have easily have rejigged the show and sort of.
Oh, I bet you David McCallum didn't want anything to do with it. I'm surprised he did The Invisible Man, because he was involved in theater and stuff.
Yeah.
By that time, why he was, well, I'm sure David McCallum was very happy that The Invisible Man was 13 episodes.
I remember being very taken with his wife, in it, a very pretty lady, Melinda Fee, who I read in Wiki has sadly died about 3 years ago.
Oh.
She was charming.
Nick, would you like to tell us, or tell Toppy and the listeners who don't know, about a show called Doomwatch?
Yes. Now, this is a rare one in that it wasn't one I was too young to see. It started in 1970, finished in 72. So I wouldn't even, which was sort of, and it was kind of the adult sort of time, it was sort of 8-ish, 9-ish. But it started in 1970. It was done by the people who created the Cybermen in Doctor Who, Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis, basically a scientist and a writer. And they were very worried about the, it's very topical these days, environmental effects of certain sort of scientific achievements and where, in some degree, obviously, science was leading us. And they collected as much facts and figures and things they did, and they did this show Doomwatch, which each week had this team of government scientists who were kind of investigating a certain sort of either a moral problem or a sort of pollution one. It covered a wide range of things. I discovered it in 1990 when Troby used to bring tapes of stuff round to my place on Sunday afternoons. And we used to, as well as swap Doctor Who's, we used to discover completely new shows. And Paul was on board by then. And I watched a few and I thought, oh, yeah. And then I watched a few a year later and got really hooked on it. And I've been a fan since.
The only negative thing being that not all of it exists anymore. One of the most famous people to come from it, it wasn't the first thing he'd done, but Robert Powell, who has had a big career.
Yeah, I know that name.
Yeah,
he was a huge. It was probably his first break, and he was a huge hit with the ladies in it. It was a big pin. Even now, my cousin, who would have been because famously his character was killed off at the end of the first series. But then, it wasn't it was a mutual decision. He didn't want to get stuck with the show for too long because he was a young actor. He wanted to move on to new things, and it traumatized the whole of Britain, because they're getting huge audience figures. It was huge in its day, there's this character Toby Wren, who was the rookie of the set of the gang. Because his boss had just hurt himself and wasn't able to defuse this bomb, he was diffusing this nuclear bomb, and he got rid of the nuclear part of it, but he was too late to stop the other part. So it was actually, as one of my reviewers on Ray Faye's Shift, my Doctor Who Take, because we explored other shows, and he said it's a nice turning on its head the old thank goodness he's diffused it with only minutes to spare routine. But no, my cousin, as I say, would have been 18 at the time. She still, although she's got all the Doom watching, she still can't watch the actual episode itself. Doesn't exist anymore. But there's a huge recap at the beginning of series 2, which does still exist, and she can't even now. She can't watch it.
That's another point about getting rid of TV. You'd have thought if you were going to keep any episode, and they did keep certain episodes. If you're going to get rid of an episode, why would you get rid of the one that was probably one of the most notorious or sort of famous episodes of the show?
But I mean, it ran for 3 seasons. Unfortunately, they've got all of series 2, most of series 1, but only actually 3 of series 3, and one of those was banned. There was an episode called Sex and Violence, which, although not actually a particularly good Doom watch in itself, because it wasn't really about science at all, it was about censorship. And where do you draw the line? Do you need it anyway? And it was because it was too close to the knuckle with the sort of so-called moral guardians that were around at the time, like Mary Whitehouse, who was a famous TV critic. The BBC got cold feet about it, and also they said the reason they pulled it, the official reason, was that there was actually because there was this team looking at sort of how far to go with sex and violence on telly and everything, and they watched they're seen watching footage of a real military execution abroad somewhere in Africa, I think, and the BBC said, we pulled it because of the footage, and ignoring the fact that A, they could have deleted that scene, and B, that footage was on the 9 o'clock news the year before, twice. So it was a kind of a whitewash job, and the episode was ordered destroyed, but for some reason nobody got round to it, and it actually exists in its full master tape version.
When the DVD came out, it's part of the collection, although copies have been circulating in fan circles for years before.
In very bad quality. And I love it. I'm actually personal friends with one of the cast. I met her on Facebook, and we just got chatting. Oh, you Dr. Chantry and Doomwatch, and we've met up in Brighton. Obviously she's in advanced 80s now, but we every time we go to Ali and I go to Brighton, we sit in the pavilion and have a cup of tea with her and talk about life, which is lovely. But there was also one of my favourite characters was one called John Ridge, who was the suave ladies man, or the more experienced ladies man of the bunch, and he was quite a humorous character. But one episode that doesn't exist anymore was the beginning of 3rd series, where he kind of wanted to leave. He goes gets lead poisoning, he goes a bit berserk, and sort of holds the government to ransom, sort of to push the green issue, and it would have been so interesting to see the point at which the show moved, instead of which it goes straight, because there's only 3 left, so you go straight in with episode 4, during which all these things have happened, and they got a new look Doomwatch and everything. Fortunately, a few years ago, an author called Michael Seeley, who was provided me with a lot of my early Doomwatches, wrote a complete guide to the show, which is out there, and also published some of the scripts of the stories that don't exist anymore. So you've got the missing first 3 episodes of series 3 to read, as scripts, which is it sheds quite a bit of light on. And you had people making their very, very early TV appearances, like Elizabeth Sladen, who played Sarah Jane Smith in Doctor Who, Anthony Andrews, who went on to become a very famous actor. I like it. Some people find it a bit slow and talky, but I like slow and talky. I like language. I like dialogue.
Early on, there were a couple of episodes that were kind of more sort of controversial, or more sort of less talky, and more sort of like there's one about plastic that melted and stuff, but notoriously there was one about rats where rats sort of can't remember why did the rats get angry?
Well, I think it was they were tampering with the genetic brain cells, and they were starting to attack humans as well.
And so there was more. I think when I first heard about it, I kind of did not know much about it. I kind of presumed it was going to be a lot more horror-y or a lot more, but then you realise it's a lot more thoughtful than that.
I think that's why I like it, really. I like the intelligence behind it. And also, every time we've watched an episode in the last few years, Ali and I turned to each other and said, this is still relevant today. You know, although the technology might have moved on or things might have changed, the whole issues within it are pretty timeless.
I don't know if you guys noticed, but every single show you've brought up are all apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, or it's all of them involve like we're the end of the world, or we're trying to solve the end of the world. What the hell was going on with the national or world? What do you want to call it? Zeitgeist? Why was this such a prevalent topic?
That's very true.
Except for Rent-A-Ghost.
Well, except for Rent-A-Ghost. That was hardly that wasn't apologetic, let alone apocalyptic. But I mean, you're quite right. Actually, I mean, it's the sort of miserable British kind of way of looking at the world. You know, well, I always said, there was on one of my articles for the tape zines I did when I was doing the changes. I said the 70s showed, you know, in terms of TV, the 70s showed you the end of the world might come and how to survive, and the 80s showed you the end of the world will come and how to die horribly. Because the 80s were even darker. You know, you had The Day After with you guys and Threads with us, and you know we got nuclear fear got at a paranoid level.
I mean, I'm always like when you watch shows and films from the 60s and 70s and even earlier, the whole talk about environment, looking after the environment, it's not new by any means. People have been talking about it for 60, 70 years, probably longer, and yet we still find there are people going, oh no, it's all a fake, it's not happening, none of this is happening, la 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 la.
Mm-hmm. But no, it's a lovely show, but I think it's been ill-served in terms of the releases. They when they released it, it took them ages to release it. They didn't release it on DVD fully and the complete series until 2016. And when they did, it was a pretty good dozy box set because they didn't even name the on the menu. They didn't even name the episodes, and they certainly didn't clean them up.
And when you consider how some series are so well served, you know, particularly as fans of Doctor Who, you notice when you get a shoddy job because we're so used to such good.
We're used to being pampered when it comes to restoration.
So not having a DVD box there where they haven't even bothered to name the episodes on the DVD menu really is poor. Very amateur.
And also they just used any old picture on the discs as well, including one character smoking a pipe, and he never smoked a pipe in the show. I don't know quite what that's about.
One of the other things about Doomwatch is that there was a movie version. It wasn't by Hammer or Amicus, was it? It was by Tygon, was it?
Yes, yeah,
Tygon. But the weird thing is, it had. Was it made during season 2.
It was made between series 2 and 3. So
And
it still had some of the series 2 regulars that didn't return for series 3.
Yeah, you see the sort of familiar faces, but then it goes off with a scientist who
Ian Bannon.
you've never seen before, and it's all about. It's weird. I don't know why they didn't.
It's not enough. I mean, its heart's there, but it's not enough like the show for my life.
They could at least have had one or two of the actual proper cast in it all the way through, rather than it's a bit of a strange one. But a lot of TV shows got film treatments, often sitcoms, but
for better or worse.
Yes. Toppy, what about you? We'll probably do. We'll let you do one more, and then we'll do one more, then you can do one more, and then we'll probably have to say goodbye after that. Although we could have a little bit of a chatter at the end about things that we didn't get a chance to mention.
Okay. So here's another one that you guys probably know more about than I do, because it's another show that we didn't get to see all of, but you guys did. So maybe you'll remember it. It's called Beyond Westworld.
Oh.
And it was based on the movie Westworld. Now, there was a very recent redo of Westworld that I guess was quite successful, but this ain't that. This is going way back to 1980. It was called Beyond Westworld. And in this case, those androids, those robots, were infiltrating, important parts of government and technology and things. And there was this team of, I don't know, secret agents or whatever they were, that, their job was to find these robots and put them out of commission. So I was watching it because I was fascinated by the first movie, and we can all forget about Future World with Peter Pan. But the first Westworld movie just fascinated me. So when I heard that they were doing a Westworld TV series, I watched it. But I guess the show was plagued with production problems, and it, another show that was expensive to do, and nobody was watching. So the damn thing was taken off the air after only 3 episodes, which is maybe the fastest something is taken out. You really have to be doing poorly to only get 3 tries on American television. But you guys saw the rest of them, even though there were only 5 total produced. But I don't think you guys don't seem to recognize this one.
No, the name rings a bell, but I think I just presumed it was another movie.
I certainly know that. I think I own both of the original movies, but
I've never seen Westworld.
I'll have to dig it up.
I'd be interested to see it.
It's worth seeing. Yeah, it's worth seeing.
Crichton wrote the original book.
Yeah, Michael Crichton wrote the. I think Michael Crichton also had something to do with the movie. Maybe he wrote. He might have been involved with the screenplay or something. But yeah, this. I thought, well, in 1980, I thought it was a good show. It says here, in the United Kingdom, all 5 episodes were shown by some ITV regions separately. An early evening slot, but they delayed the 5th for some reason. Blah 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 blah. Yorkshire Television showed them all more than once. Ulster Television showed a couple episodes 6 months apart. Anyways, so
I think maybe because we were in 1980, we were still Southern TV for another year. So Southern TV are notoriously. They did some fairly good stuff, but they didn't pick up Space 1999 until a year in.
Space 1999. Yeah.
The rest of the world seemed to be picking it up in September 75, and I used to buy a magazine called Look In for kids, and they had a gorgeous artwork cover on that week that Space started, and I thought,
Yeah.
it's going to be great. And I was already a fan of some of Jerry Anderson's shows, and nothing until Saturday morning in August '76, and it was very weird because I was seeing the characters for the first time in the flesh, because I'd been reading the comic strips for a year, and seeing them real was very weird.
We got to see Space 1999 over here. I think it was syndicated. Geez, I want to say it was on every afternoon for a short time. Yeah.
So, Nick, part of the last show we're going to talk about in any detail this episode, as we're beginning to run out of time, is a show that I think you introduced me to. I never saw it at the time, but I think you did watch it at the time, and that's Children of the Stones.
Oh, yes. Ooh. I watched it at the time. Yes, this is a children's series about a neological stone circle in Wiltshire, and was filmed in a real geological Neolithical stone circle in genuinely in Wiltshire. Very creepy. It went out at the children's bit, but was pretty bold, really, in terms of there was nothing gory about it, but it was, the atmosphere was, and again, very intelligent script. It was all, based in a sort of interest in real sort of black holes, real sort of history, and a sort of an extrapolation of those ideas, and it very satisfying watching.
It did have younger characters in it, but they were probably 15, 16-year-old. They weren't kids.
No,
kids.
And they were all pretty intelligent. And it was just extremely spooky. It had some well-known faces at the time. Freddie Jones, who was a character actor for many years. Ian Cuthbertson, again, who was quite a high-profile actor at the time. So they really went for They didn't sort of, it's a kid show. They really went for some good actors. And it was this village that sort of had this where the chief, the squire, had this influence on people, and it was all to do with the influence of the Stones. I won't go into too much detail, but it had a most wonderfully frightening soundtrack by a guy called Sidney Sager, who put together these Neolithic kind of chants, so when it starts, there's all these kind of close-ups on these stones and this chanting, and then it increases. And it's still, even though I sort of saw it originally when it was shown in 77 and then again the following summer in 78, it still sends a shiver down my spine nearly 48 years later. Nearly 47 years later. So it really nicely done show.
It's got almost that sort of vibe, although not the same motivation, but almost reminds me of an IR11 type thing, like a Rosemary's Baby, where there's something going on and paranoia and sort of
and with a shade of Wicker Man,
and maybe a little bit of Stepford Wives, although it's nothing to do with robots. But it's sort of cult. There's a sort of culty vibe as well of people sort of that appear to be nice who aren't maybe what they appear to be. All those sorts of.
But it's all very neatly tied, all very neatly explained. And it's it's got the right amount of finding, and it did give me nightmares. In fact, I was still having nightmares just about the soundtrack, even in my 30s. But it was, one of those. I don't know if when you have a nightmare when you're quite small and you're able to sleep in with your mum. That was the last of those nightmares. I really did freak me out. And I imagined at the time I was at school with this Spanish boy called Herbie, and I imagined him turning into stone. I was like,
when did you get your first video copy?
Well, mine.
So that would be when I.
Because I was looking for a copy for ages and ages. I got my first bootleg copy in 1989 with Trope. No, was it actually? Yeah, it was 1989 from Linda King and I got my first. I don't think I ever. So I played cat and mouse with the actual video release, because they had a video release in. When we used to meet up in the early 90s, we'd go to Oxford Street in London, and there would be Virgin Megastore and there'd be HMV, and we'd go in, and if there was a video copy of Children of the Stones, I would either be slightly strapped for cash or thinking, can I afford this, because I only had a small low-paid job, and inevitably when I went in there with the cash, it wasn't there. So but I think my first official copy wasn't until 2002. Ali, when it came out on DVD, Ali bought me a copy. Yeah, and we watched it recently. We still got our copy from.
It would have been your bootleg copy that I saw the first time I saw it, but because around in the 90s, because it was a location that we could visit on the bus from Salisbury.
Yeah,
it became. It was certainly 2 or 3 times I filmed Sutton Park there. I filmed quite an early episode there, and then I did. The stones are so big, and unlike Stonehenge, which you're not allowed to go up to and touch anymore, you can give the stones at Avebury a big old hug if you want to, or
although you might not want to after you've seen Children of the Stones.
Yeah, it was filming Sutton Park there was like playing Children of the Stones if you've been in the playground when you were a kid. I'm sure I did stuff about sort of, oh no, my hand's being dragged towards the stone. What's going to happen? And
the thing is, I've got a picture of myself at Amesbury from 1973, which is 3 years before it was actually made. So I did actually go to Amesbury before it was made. But it's still nice to go back now.
Yeah, I have been back there in the time of the podcast. We did do an episode. One of the times I was down after Christmas, and my mum and dad said, "Do you want to go anywhere for a day out?" And I said, "Can we go to Avebury?" and we all went down to April for the day, and I recorded a podcast down there.
I haven't been down there for yonks, but I presume it still gets aboutable by bus.
Yeah, it's not so direct anymore. I think you have to change it at Marlborough, which is a pain, but still doable, I suppose. But it is very much in the middle of nowhere if you get stuck there. So, yeah. Toppy, what about your last show for this episode?
Well, this one is super interesting, but also at the same time incredibly laughable. Well, let me. I got to read you the opening narration because every show had. You guys know William Conrad, right? He was canon on American. He had this deep voice, and he did a lot of narrating. He was also on the radio when radio was a thing. But every opening narration, let's see if you can guess what show this is. William Conrad says, Dr. Jonathan Chase, wealthy, young, handsome, a man with the brightest of futures, a man with the darkest of pasts. From Africa's deepest recesses to the rarefied peaks of Tibet, heir to his father's legacy and the world's darkest mysteries, Jonathan Chase, master of the secrets that divide man from animal, animal from man. Any idea what the show was?
Again, it sounds vague.
The last word in the narration, the last fragment is animal. Man from animal, animal from man.
Oh, no,
manimal.
It's not. Is it manimal? Is it manimal?
It is manimal.
From the
It's manimal.
Oh yes.
Oh my God. Oh, what a. You gotta watch this just to laugh at it. So yeah, it was another expensive show to do. That they put on to go up against Dallas on Friday nights. And, of course, Dallas smeared it all over the place. And there was, I don't know, just a handful of episodes that were ever made because it was canceled very quickly. But it starred Simon McCorkindale as the lead. And he...
at least it didn't involve the end of the world.
Yeah, at least that. And... He was a guy that could change into any animal he wanted, only because of budgetary limitations. They only had him turned into 3 animals. In every episode, it was the same stupid animals. He turned himself into a Black Panther, and he turned himself into this a hawk or an eagle or something, so that he could fly around. And what was the other animal he was always turning into?
I suppose if they had a cheap episode, he could be a hamster or something.
Yeah, those were the 2 main ones, a hawk and a Black Panther, although he could be anything. And in fact, they all the changes of these other animals I'm going to mention were all off camera because it was too hard for them to do. He apparently turned himself into a horse. Once he turned himself into a dolphin, once a bear, and then a snake. But anyways, I think the only reason the show ever got even made was that they got Stan Winston, a famous special effects artist who won an Academy Award, and he had recently done a movie with William Hurt where he would be in a suspension tank, and he transgressed into an ape-like creature. What the hell was that movie called? Anyways, in that movie, William Hurt changes into this weird thing, and he looks at one scene, quite memorable. He looks at his hand, and you can see his skin moving and bulbing up, and it was just a prosthetic with a balloon in there that they would inflate with air. But anyways, that's what they used for Manimal. And when he changed, he would look at his hand, and you could see it go blue, blue. And then sometimes they would put the prosthetic in his face, and these bubbles would blue. And then, somehow he was Black Panther. Oh, get this. He was this dapper gentleman, so he wore these three-piece suit with a tie and everything. And part of the change was that he would rip out of these clothes. Except that when he shapeshift back, his clothes would be magical.
It's the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, but his clothes would be magically back on. Like, anyways, it's a hoot and a half if you can ever see it.
I think I remember it. I certainly have. I have slight memories of.
I certainly know the name. I don't know if I watched it, but I certainly recognise that one. Was the William Hurt film called Altered States?
Yes, that's it. Altered States. Scary movie. Boy, if you ever want to be disturbed, watch Altered States.
Directed by Ken Russell as well.
And I think Sam Winston is the guy that, because that was the first time you ever saw anything like Altered States was. When you saw that effect, it was like, ew, you've never seen anything like it. And they got this guy to do the transition sequences for Manimal, and I think that's the only reason it got made.
They did that quite a lot, because the things like Scanners, they did the same sort of thing with sort of bubbly heads and bubbly faces.
Yeah. So, if you ever want a hoot and a half, catch Manimal. I'm not sure where you can see it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least one episode on YouTube.
Talking of Scanners, there was Kenny Everett, who was one of our comedians and DJs, and he did a sketch once on his show, and Scanners had just come out, and he did an audition for a Hollywood producer, and he said, well, my head explodes, and he kind of, so they sat him down, and his head explodes, and the guy behind goes, this is terrific, we'll make a fortune, and he goes, well, I have to say, it's the first time I've done it. I don't really like it all that much.
Well, Toppy, Nick, thank you for showing some of these more obscure shows with the listeners. I mean, I'm sure the listeners will have known of some of them, but it depends, I mean, we didn't know the US ones, so I think it's been a good experiment.
Well, I've heard of Animal.
Yes,
yes.
But I think
all the shows you told me about were totally new to me.
Yeah, that was my intention. So I'm glad that it was a good idea. We've got to go now, listeners. We may have a little bit of a chat, or maybe even a possible sort of mention of one or two other shows that we could talk in more detail about on another episode like this, if you've been interested. So let us know if you've enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks, Toppy. Thanks, Nick. And we'll be back again soon.
All right. Good to be with y'all again.
Yeah. Good to see you. Well, good to see you. Good to hear you again.
Okie dokie. Bye for now, listeners.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Shows that
you might have, Toppy, you hinted that you might have had one or two more we could have talked about. Maybe we can talk about them another time, but any titles out there that...
Well, you guys may have seen this, but I was terribly fond of it. It only lasted for 13 episodes, but they did do a television series of The Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, we got that one.
Was Roddy McDowell in the
Yes.
I think he was.
Yes, he was. In fact, he said, if you do Planet of the Apes without me, then I'm going to be really mad. And you don't want a mad Roddy McDowell. No. He was
God bless him.
Yeah. I mean, we could have told you about the Tomorrow People, which is a big favourite of Nick's. which
now
was...
That one I've heard of. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was a load of kids with special powers.
The next stage of human evolution, basically. It's they've got telepathy. They can't kill, but they can open mind. They've got mind powers and things like that. It was basically ITV's attempt to rival Doctor Who back in '73. I mean, the special effects were a little bit on the tacky side, but I think most of the, certainly with the early episodes, the story's outed. And I would, again, with the kids magazine Look In, which I got around that time, and the repeat season was my introduction to it, really. And I've recently purchased, in fact it arrived 2 days ago, a book of the complete comics adventures of in Look In of the Tomorrow People, which I'm
okay. There was a comic book version.
Yeah. There was.
I think that's what I know it from.
Had a strip thing in Look In, and until about 1978, and I came along in '75 with started getting Look In regularly, and so a lot of the adventures from those were weekly picture strips. I remember the stories really, really well. So I'm absolutely chuffed that they're releasing all the complete stories in book form.
But they did do a 90s reboot and then a much more recent reboot. So you may even have heard the phrase Tomorrow People, because they definitely did a one-season show about early 2020s or late 2019.
I think I only caught a little bit of that. It was a US one, because Roger Price, who created the Tomorrow People and wrote pretty well all of the originals, has been in the States for years and worked in the States for years. So I think but they did, and it's a kind of international one with American characters and Australian characters and British characters in the 90s with sort of increased special effects. But they didn't have enough elements of the old series to enjoy it as much as I would. But they did get Christopher Lee as one of the baddies. He was amazing in that.
Yeah. I have a bit of a long-standing feud with Tomorrow People, because the show I mentioned earlier, Ace of Wands. I mean, I was alive for Tomorrow People, but I never saw an episode as far as I remember. Even though it went right up to 1979, is that right?
Well, I think the last repeat season was 80.
Yeah, I never saw it, but so I discovered Tomorrow People and Ace of Wands through knowing Nick, and I just really clicked with Ace of Wands. And my only real reason that I resent it is that I know that Ace of Wands finished and they decided to do Tomorrow People instead. And I really think the ideal situation would have been that both would have existed, but the Ace of Wands would have been made for an adult audience, because it was a format that worked well for older people. I would have liked there to have been as many seasons of Ace of Wands as there were Tomorrow People. And also, sadly, the first 2 seasons of Ace of Wands don't exist. So, as far as I'm aware, almost the episodes that I do see from the 3rd season are not necessarily the best ones. Unfortunately, the ones that, although there are some good ones in that 3rd season.
There was, because as Paul said, we were collecting them, the surviving ones from Series 3. But there was one epic story that eluded us for many, many years, and that was one from Mamadoc. And we'd read synopsises about this woman who could shrink people, and if they break, they bleed. And it was nonsense. It was just a woman who made people behave like dolls. So there's no breaking them, there's no bleeding, and they weren't shrunk to size. They were just sort of conditioned.
It just shows that how before Wikipedia and things like that, sometimes it was quite difficult to find information about these shows, or to be certain whether all of the 3rd season is it. We could only base it on what we had got access to.
There was a wonderful publication of a sci-fi encyclopedia in the early 90s, and that was our Bible for a while in terms of telly. And we heard all these. Oh well, let's see that episode, and then you discovered it's wiped.
I gotta go now. Gotta go. Bye.
goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Yes, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Wow. Really? No kidding.
Thank you, darling. And you too. Bye-bye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear. What's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast. Let's go.
I have a voice.
I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice.
We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
That is so cringe, oh my god.
You're a man of culture as well.
But things are still showing up. An episode. Well, sometimes it's because the people who are involved in it have kept hold of them. But there was this is a radio thing, but an episode of Hancock's Half Hour, comedy show from the 50s and 60s, just a copy of a missing episode surfaced just this week. But the trouble is, sometimes the people who do the cleaning up have got boxes and boxes of tapes that have been returned. But a lot of them, it's not their full-time job. And it just takes a long time to get through it all. And
similarly, there's an episode of Till Death Us Do Part from 1968, which has just come back. Just come back. They've just
about 5 years, isn't it?
Yes,
Just gone around to cleaning
They've
it.
only just told you about, only just told us about it, but it was actually discovered in 2018.
And the person who posted about it, who's the head of the site, is not a fan of that show and was quite sort of unhappy about its return.
It was taken by one of the cast as a viewing copy, so it's an original copy. It's an original tape. It's got the transmission. The transmission details at the beginning of end of each episode, which is amazing.
Yeah. So things, even from 50, 60 years, are still showing up. But
and it's still exciting. I'm just hoping that some of the shows that we mentioned that are missing episodes, including Who, will still... I'd like to see some Who back again in my lifetime.
We're just coming up to the 60th anniversary in November, and the last major return was closer to the 50th.
Yeah, it was pretty well bang on 50. It was October 2013 with Enemy of the World and Web of That was such an exciting find.
That was, and also the way they announced it, they were kind of like, if you want to go and download it, it's available for downloading now. And I remember my internet wasn't that good in 2013 at home, and I just sat up and I was determined. It would have taken far too long to watch 6 episodes of something, but I was just keen. If I could download 1 episode before I went to bed, then that would make it real, because it was almost like a sort of, is this really happening?
I was very proud of myself. I held out for another month because one of the first of those stories, Enemy of the World, was actually released on DVD in the November. And I thought, well, I'd like to actually see it cleaned up and proper and kind of, I'd like to sit down and watch it on the machine. I
had more money than sense. I was like, I'll be buying that as well, but I'm not waiting I might be run over by a car tomorrow. Yeah. But then I was the same with when the new Doctor Who came back, and a friend of mine said, but when the first episode was about, a month before it was supposed to be shown, a friend of mine said, I've got a copy of the slightly early draft of the first episode of the new Doctor Who if you want to see it. And I was like, give it to me now, please. And I watched it about 20 times before it was even screened. And other sensible people, well, whatever. Other people waited politely, but I
just like, it's like the Blu-ray copies of Who, they released the unlimited edition, which was a big package which notoriously falls apart and not very well made. But I wait for the more dinkier, stronger made standard ones. But you have to wait because there's about a 2-year gap between the releases.
The only thing about that is, you didn't have a Blu-ray player when they first started coming out.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that they were going to do... I bought the original because I didn't know they were going to do a dinky package. It would have been nicer to have had a dinky package, really, but it's too late now. I've been buying literally, when I went into... Ali and I went into
FOP shop in London, and I just felt, I'd like to have a Blu-ray Doctor Who, and I wasn't thinking of standard or particularly limited edition. I didn't even know they did the standard ones, and I thought the one I was hoping for wasn't there, but one of the ones, I'm a pretty well Who completist when it comes to the DVD, so I bought one, and it was only when I got home I realised it was the slimmer version, which I've been collecting since. But
well, very good. Guess what I have to do now?
Go and see your parents.
No. I have to do my laundry.
Oh.
That's me on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
I hope that Yeti bathed today. That's all I can say.
And then there's the episode where Paul laid an egg. Yeah, he did. There was a dragon in it. God, is this show gonna end anytime soon? No, kitty, kitty, kitty. Purr, kitty, kitty, kitty. Oh, I love Dee Dee. Paul, that was a whopper.
700.
That was beautifully done.
Et voilà.